My boss stole credit for my work for 3 years, presented it as his own to the board, got a promotion and a six-figure bonus with my projects. And the day he fired me thinking I had nothing, I opened my laptop and showed him the metadata of every file he had called his own. The day I was fired was a Wednesday. I remember because Wednesdays had always seemed like the most neutral day of the week to me, the day with no story, the day that simply exists to connect the beginning to the end. And yet, that specific Wednesday became the day that changed everything, just not in the way my boss expected, when he called me into his office at 10 in the morning with an expression that mixed discomfort with something I can only describe as relief. He told me the company was going through a restructuring, that my position had been eliminated, that they valued my contribution, but that circumstances left no other option. He offered me 2 weeks of severance and a letter of recommendation. 2 weeks. For 3 years of work that had built his career. He handed me the envelope with the papers and waited for me to take it, sign it, and leave. I opened my laptop instead. My name is Camila. I'm 30 years old. I'm a data analyst specializing in business intelligence. And for 3 years, I worked at a mid-sized financial consulting firm under the direct supervision of a man named Gerald Villanueva, director of strategy, 47 years old, always impeccably dressed, firm handshake, and the most developed ability I have ever witnessed in my life to take other people's work and present it as his own with a naturalness that bordered on art. When I joined that company, I was 27 and the youngest analyst in the department. Gerald welcomed me with what I interpreted at the time as genuine enthusiasm. He told me he had reviewed my portfolio, that my methodology was exactly what the department needed, that he had big plans for the team. What he actually had were big plans for my work. It took me 6 months to fully understand that. It took me 3 years to have enough evidence to do something about it. The pattern started with the first major project I was assigned. It was a profitability analysis by customer segment for one of the firm's most important clients. I worked on it for 6 weeks. I built the model from scratch, developed the methodology, created the visualizations, wrote the complete executive report. The week before the presentation, Gerald asked me to send him all the files for review. I sent everything. He told me there were some minor adjustments he wanted to make before presenting. On the day of the presentation to the client, Gerald walked into the conference room alone. I was not summoned. When I asked him afterward how it had gone, he said excellent, that the client had been very satisfied, and that my support in the preparation had been valuable. Support in the preparation. 6 weeks of work, a complete model, a 40-page report, and my official role was support in the preparation. I let it go the first time because I thought it was the normal dynamic in large companies. That directors present and analysts prepare, and that is how hierarchy works. I told myself that with time, I would have my own opportunities for visibility. The second time, it was a predictive modeling project for another client. 12 weeks of work. An algorithm I had developed using a combination of techniques that was genuinely innovative for the type of analysis we were doing. Gerald presented it at an industry conference as a methodology developed by the department he led. I saw in the conference recording someone had uploaded to YouTube. I sat staring at the screen for a stretch of time I couldn't measure. And then I opened a new folder on my computer and named it Record. Over the next 2.5 years, I documented everything with a meticulousness that surprises even me looking back. Not because I am an obsessive person, but because it was the only way to protect myself from something that didn't have a clear name yet, but that I felt as an injustice accumulating layer by layer. The metadata of every file I created automatically recorded my username as author, the date and time of creation, and the modification history. Every model, every report, every visualization had my name embedded in its internal code, even if on the surface it carried Gerald's name or the department's. I saved screenshots of the emails where Gerald asked me for the files before each presentation. I saved the emails where I sent him the completed work. I saved original versions of every document with their metadata intact. I saved conference programs and meeting agendas where he presented that work under his name. And I saved something else that turned out to be the most important thing of all, Internal emails where clients and company executives responded to Gerald's presentations with specific technical questions that he redirected to me to answer. Emails where I provided the complete technical answer and he forwarded it to the client with his signature, without mentioning the answer had come from me. That pattern, documented over 2 years, was a complete map of what was happening. The promotion came in the 3rd year. Gerald was promoted to Vice President of Strategy. The internal announcement said the promotion was recognition of his leadership in developing innovative analytical methodologies that had generated exceptional results for the firm's clients. Innovative analytical methodologies. Mine. The bonus associated with the promotion, which I learned about through an internal source, was a considerable amount. Enough to buy a luxury car without thinking twice. That day, I went to my car in the parking garage, sat inside, and allowed myself 5 minutes of pure rage. 5 minutes of hitting the steering wheel and saying out loud everything I couldn't say inside the building. And then I picked up my phone and called an attorney specializing in intellectual property and labor law that a friend had recommended months earlier when I first told her what was happening. It was time. Attorney Esperanza Ruiz was 40 years old, had a small office with too many books, and a habit of asking questions with a surgical precision that disoriented me at first and that I came to value enormously. The first meeting lasted 3 hours. I showed her everything. The files with metadata, the emails, the screenshots, the conference programs, the redirected client emails, 2.5 years of chronologically organized records. When I finished showing her everything, she leaned back in her chair and looked at me for a few seconds. She told me I had a solid case for a claim of misappropriation of intellectual property in a labor context, and that depending on how the investigation developed, there could also be elements of labor fraud, given that my work had been the direct basis for significant economic compensation he had received without me being recognized or compensated. She asked me when I wanted to proceed. I told her not yet, that I wanted to wait for the right moment. She looked at me with an expression that said she understood, even if she didn't necessarily agree. I told her that when the moment came, I would know. The moment came that Wednesday, when Gerald handed me the envelope with the termination papers. I hadn't planned for it to be that specific day, but when I saw his expression, that mix of discomfort and relief I described at the beginning, when I heard the words restructuring and position eliminated and 2 weeks of severance, something inside me settled into place with a click so clear I almost heard it physically. I opened my laptop. I told him that before signing anything, I wanted to show him something. He looked at me with the expression of someone who is certain they have control of the situation and is being minimally condescending towards someone who is about to understand they have no options. I opened a record folder. I showed him the metadata from the first project, his name on the cover of the report, my name in the internal code of every file, the creation date 2 weeks before he had even requested the project. I showed him the emails, the complete pattern of 2.5 years. I showed him the technical responses I had provided that he had forwarded as his own. I showed him the conference program where he had presented my methodology as his, with the YouTube recording still open in another tab. Gerald said nothing for a very long time. Then he said that wasn't what it looked like. I told him my attorney considered it was exactly what it looked like, and that unless he wanted the conversation to continue in a different setting, perhaps it was time to discuss terms. What followed were 6 weeks of negotiation that I am not going to describe in detail, because the terms of the settlement include a confidentiality clause I am obligated to respect. What I can say is this. I did not sign the 2 weeks of severance they had offered me. What I signed was significantly different, enough to cover my expenses while I found my next position and to partially compensate for 3 years of unrecognized work. The company also agreed to issue a letter of recommendation that described my contributions specifically and accurately, something that turned out to be more valuable in practical terms than any financial amount, because in my industry, reputation is the real currency. Gerald kept his position. That was the hardest thing to accept. There were no public disciplinary consequences because the company preferred to handle everything internally and quietly. It is the reality of the corporate world. Institutions protect their structures before their individuals, and a vice president is a more valuable structure than a 30-year-old analyst, no matter how good her documentation is. But there are consequences. Inside the company, Among the people who need to know these things, the story got out. These things always get out. And Gerald went from being the brilliant director with innovative methodologies to being the director people talk about in hushed voices with a raised eyebrow. That is not perfect justice, but it is something. Today I work at another company, a larger one with better conditions where I present my own work in my own presentations with my name on the cover and my conclusions in my own voice. The first time I presented to an important client at this new job, my hands trembled slightly before walking into the room. Not from fear, from something more like emotion, the feeling that this moment, this presentation, this recognition was genuinely mine. That no one had given it to me and no one could take it away. When I walked out of that room and the client shook my hand and said it was the most solid presentation he had seen in months, I went to the restroom, looked at myself in the mirror, and allowed myself a moment that I had been waiting years for. Just that moment. Just for me. What I learned from all of this is not only that you need to document, though that is critical, and if you work in a creative or analytical environment, you should start today if you haven't already. What I learned is that real work leaves traces. Metadata doesn't lie. Dates don't lie. Emails don't lie. And when you have years of organized traces, the truth doesn't need you to shout it. It just needs someone to see it. And that Wednesday, in that office, someone saw it. If this story made you clench your teeth, comment. Would you have waited or acted sooner? Like if you believe honest work deserves real recognition. Subscribe for more real stories. Share with someone living something similar at work who doesn't know they have options. Practical tip. If you work in an environment where you create digital files, never delete the originals. Authorship metadata, creation date, and time are legal evidence. Always keep a copy outside the company's servers, in a personal and secure storage. Your work has a digital trail that belongs to you.